This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and today I have our good friend Sarah from Nova Scotia with us. We were originally going to have her with Jolene and on our YouTube Live. Unfortunately, we couldn't coordinate that with her, so we said, you know what, we still want to hear Sarah's opinions about this year's 2024 Canada Reads competition. So Sarah, welcome. We're very excited to have you back.
Oh, thank you so much. I was sad that I couldn't make it during the week, but this is great, and I'm so glad to get to chat with you about Canada Reads tonight.
We talked a lot after the competition, and we had a great conversation back and forth. It was really pretty amazing. And we just want to give you an opportunity to say some of those things that we talked about. So we're just going to have this be a natural conversation. I don't think there's any hardcore questions I'm going to ask you or anything like that. It's more just, we'll kick it off by just saying, what did you think of Canada Reads 2024? And then we'll just go into perhaps all those topics we discussed.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, wow, this Canada Reads, I have a lot of thoughts. I had a lot of thoughts during the entire run of the show, and then I guess they just kept snowballing from there. And I was I was really amazed and impressed at the the amount of education I received during this run. I don't know what to call it, a run or a season or what, but yeah, there was just a lot to learn this time, and I was really grateful to all of the defenders and authors, and especially the fan community as well. I learned so much from all the different participants this year, and I'm just so grateful.
Did you mostly, when you talk about the fans, because I think Canada Reads kind of did not allow comments on a lot of their social media. So are you talking about the Facebook group that was generating a lot of interesting comments?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a content junkie when it comes to things that I love. So, aside from watching the show, I'm in the Canada Reads Facebook group. I think it's like a CBC official Canada Reads group. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is. Also, after the show, I immediately would go and listen to JL Richardson's famous recap of the show, and I learn a lot from her. I really respect her opinions and thoughts on things, and she really looks at the show in a very similar way that I do, and so I'd like to hear what she has to say. And then, of course, your podcast, which I would listen to usually that night, but this year I was really busy, so I tended to listen to it the next morning while I was getting ready for work. So it was all Canada Reads content all the time for me this year.
So what stood out for you? So whether it's the Facebook page or JL or our podcast and our live, what's the first thing that sort of stood out for you this year?
You know, there's something that I think I've always wanted more of during the debates, and this year really, really delivered. And that was a really good discussion on the craft of writing. And as like a book super fan, like like you are, that's I just crave that level of enrichment from either the defenders or the books themselves, but also that like fan commentary after the show. And this year really, really delivered. So I love that there was some discussion on that first person narrative, that inner voice with Denison Avenue, and we had some really good discussion on prose as represented in really all of the books, but I think Kudakwache did an excellent job of highlighting that for both her own book and Denison Avenue specifically. And that's something that usually we have to wait till day, 3 or 4 to dig into. But I felt like there was a good like smattering of it. I don't know if smattering's the right word throughout the show, and it really they were really able to dig deeper towards the end, and so that was really excellent. And what I loved about that discussion of the first person narrative was really in relation to Denison Avenue and the older woman's voice, because there was that one criticism on how. Now let me think how it went. So I think the comment, I can't remember who it was from. Was it from, oh shoot. I think the discussion was about how the voice of the main character didn't sound like an older woman. It sounded like a younger person, and that wasn't realistic. And I would strongly refute that, because I don't like, what does an older woman sound like? Do we expect them to just be quiet and meek and sitting and knitting, or really, I don't believe that at all. I think, you know, thinking about my mother, and I know this is something I mentioned to you before, is my mother and I were talking about aging one day, and she said to me, and I'll never forget it. She said, "I don't feel like the age I am. I feel like I'm still that like 16, 20-year-old girl. I think the same way. It's just my body feels older." And it's true. She's vibrant, she's playful and active and funny, and so it got me thinking, like, what does an older woman sound like? And so I loved how that commentary really came out in the show about how, and then it was Heather O'Neill had a really great point about, I think it was Heather, about looking at how women are portrayed in books, especially the older women. How is their character how does their character develop and their arc develop over the story? And you know, she's what was the line she said about how to, oh, she was it like how to create a villain, or what, I or how to dislike an older woman at the beginning of a book. She said something, anyway, the quote she said was, "Start your novel with Alice is 50 years old." And the whole concept was that was going to create a negative feeling about the character. And so that just I just thought so much about that, and I loved that deeper look at characterization and craft in the books themselves.
Yeah, I loved when Heather said that because, as an older woman, it is true what they say about as you get older, you're less and less visible to people. You just don't exist anymore. And so I love that she said that because the last place we want to lose older women is in literature because that's something that we create for ourselves. So I really, really appreciate that she made that comment. And I also laugh because when you and I were talking, I still think I'm 42 years old. It's weird how you get older and your body definitely changes and you get older, but your brain is just completely in a different place. And I love reading about older women talking about this very subject because we're all in the same boat. So as everybody gets older, I promise you, you're going to continue to feel like you're young in your mind, no matter what your body may or may not be doing. So now, I do wanna ask you because this was the big topic, and I think I said on our podcast too or on our live that it's kind of the elephant in the room, but the whole thing with Dallas because and I'm gonna let you go ahead and speak first because I think I'm pretty much just going to agree with what you're gonna say, but I actually learned a lot that I didn't know, and I think one of the things that's really important to us as human beings is always to try to find the place of empathy and understanding, or I should say sympathy, empathy, or understanding. So, do you wanna just touch base on a little bit of what when we were talking about the whole situation with Dallas?
Yeah, sure. I am so grateful for Dallas and that he was present at the table. I have a lot of thoughts about, his participation in a lot of different ways, but I think the most important thing to highlight is what the attention he has brought to dyslexia and the potential of dyslexic people or people living with dyslexia. He did a really great job. I think, he struggled a little bit here and there, and he definitely struggled the first 2 days. But because of his participation, I learned so much. And, he brought to light some of the struggles, so, and the needs of accessibility and the importance of providing alternative formats for reading books. So the audiobooks especially, you know his voice was really a love letter to audiobooks. And I think especially Denison Avenue, where I learned, and I didn't listen to the audiobook, but from this experience I learned that it included the the descriptive audio of the presentation of the prose and the text. And I thought that was so important because we did learn from the other defenders about how important the use of the white space was on the page and the organization of the text itself. So to have that descriptive audio of how that was set up just really provides a possibility for people that otherwise they might not get to experience. And I hope that continues as a trend with audiobooks. I compared it to descriptive video on movies and TV shows, and how important that has been, and it's opened up a world for people to be able to enjoy those stories. I did read I read a lot of criticism about his performance, I guess is the word to use on the show. And while I agree with some of it, of course, not everybody is a experienced debater or even comes across as a very experienced reader. But I think what Dallas has shown us is that everybody deserves a place at the table and everybody is capable of discussing literature and deserves to be there and do those things. And we have a lot to learn from each other. And in the Facebook group, I did see a really good description of dyslexia and what that encompasses. And originally, I thought it was largely about visualizing the text on the page and how your eyes and your brain process those words. But what I learned from I believe this lady was a retired nurse, and she did an excellent job of teaching me, and I guess everybody, that it's as much about organizing the thoughts in your brain and being able to recall what you've learned and what you've read and kind of put it back out there in a thoughtful way. So it affects like all stages of your input and output of text and contextualizing your thoughts. And that I didn't appreciate all of that at the time. So I just think he did a really great job considering what he was up against. And I hope other people can look at his participation and say, like, wow, this is something I can do too. And he did have a really self-deprecating manner at the end there, and my heart definitely went out for him because I know not everybody is in a place to be fully I don't even know how to put this, but maybe they haven't fully embraced what they're dealing with. And I just my heart just went out to him because I think so many people will be able to relate to being in the position he's in. And I just look forward to hearing from him again in the future and follow him and see what he's reading.
Yeah, I wanna say a couple things about this because, yeah, the descriptive audio on Denison Avenue, now I read it in ebook, but not audio. I did read it as an ebook, and I did actually just order the book, so I wanna own it, and I really wanna pour over the pictures and reread the book because I just thought I loved it. It was my favorite book of this year. But, I started thinking about when you said that about descriptive video, I went, "Oh, for crying out loud, that's what my mom and I do when we watch TV together." My mom is legally blind, and we watch a lot of shows with descriptive video, and thank God for it because if it didn't exist, I would have to keep pausing and explaining to my mom what's on the screen. Oh, this person is walking across the street and doing whatever. And so I am so thankful for descriptive video. So I can see how, if you are a person who doesn't need it, that it might be frustrating. So I don't know if it's something that can be turned off or not. It sounds like not in this particular book was that possible. But I think we have to be open to the idea that readers don't just read audiobooks because they're working around their kitchen or they're going somewhere on a trip and they're listening to it. Sometimes there are people who absolutely 100% depend on audiobook completely as their format. That's how they read. And so as soon as you said descriptive, I thought, "Oh my gosh, that's my mom." So of course, I want that book to be available for my mom and everybody else who needs it in that format. So that was number 1 that I wanted to say. Number 2, Yeah, that's something I learned too. I thought dyslexia was just this sort of I say simple, but I don't mean it in that way, but I just thought it was this thing like, "Oh, the letters jump," or "I can't process the letters as I look at them." I had no idea about that it could potentially change the way your brain processes information and how you then relay that information. So, I think, oh my gosh, Dallas, knowing those potential challenges in a 1-hour format for 4 days. What a brave soul he was to just tackle it and say, "I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna see how I can do." And also, I want to take back my criticism of him of saying that, that he was in fact, to be honest with you, I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I wanna take that back because I just wasn't understanding and open to who he is as a person and who others are in the ways they may have challenges in that way. So I really appreciate that I learned from him and I think many of us will perhaps have a different perspective of what he brought to the table and how maybe he's opened up this door to Canada Reads for others who may be nervous about taking on the challenge, but maybe they're more likely to do it because I think it's always really hard for the first person to walk through that door because they're going to get the most grief and then it makes it easier for everyone else who follows. So I do really appreciate everything Dallas did and I'm happy that he was on the show. Anything else you want to add before we move on because I do have another topic I want to discuss, but anything else you want to add to the Dallas discussion?
Yeah, just one very quick thing, and that's, when we talk about Canada Reads in the books, we talk about one book all Canada can read, which that can be, that's something else. My thoughts on that is something for another day. But it's not just that. I love that, one book for all of Canada, but also let's see more variety in our defenders and that can be more representative of all of us. And I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we probably see more of ourselves in Dallas than a lot of other people we've seen on the show. I'm sure most of us would be nervous. Most of us would probably be self deprecating and apologetic. I know I would. And I'm sure the majority of us would, struggle to get words to our thoughts. I know I do that all the time. I'm doing it right now. But, you know, I think we gotta keep a lot more things in mind and in perspective when we're thinking about the people who are on the show.
The next thing I wanted to ask you about, and even though you just now said that's a discussion for another time, I do want to kind of bring it up because one of the comments was made by Heather about this being a literary competition. And a lot of people I heard after the fact were saying, no, it's not. It is a reality show. And so I think there's definitely those who fall on one side of the camp and those who fall on the other. And what do you think? I think I know where you belong on the list or on the spectrum here, but what do you think? And is that a good thing? Should we change it? Should it, are there adjustments to be made?
So I love a competition. I view Canada Reads as a survivor style game show. It's survivor with books instead of eating bugs. That's the way I look at it. I love strategic voting. I love a tough conversation. I love when, there might be a little bit of saltiness in there as long as it's on topic. I love the competition. So I think there's a lot of literary prizes out there. And we have the Giller Prize, which is very literary, and more recently we have the Carol Shield Prize for literature, and that's for Canadian and American women. So I don't think we need to compete with those. I think this is the only that I know of the only game show style competition we have, and I think it's great that we can discuss literary novels hand in hand with memoirs and genre fiction. I think the claim that this is a literary competition is incorrect. Every year there are genre books, and we had Hench, we had Midnight Bargain, we've had Mexican Gothic, we have, you know, this year we have Meet Me at the Lake. It's been said it's the first romance, but I always put Midnight Bargain in the romance category as well, but I know that's romance fantasy. And so, yeah, I think there's room for everything in this competition, and I think we need to get past the literary angle, and embrace it all and discuss them for their merits, and compare and contrast all of them together, and enjoy the ride.
Do you think, though, let me ask you this, because one of the great questions was about bringing more readers into the competition or into the debates. And do you think if it were to become more, I'm going to use the word accessible in terms of it, whether it's romance or fantasy or graphic novels or whatever, do you see the core group, which is potentially more literary fiction readers, do you see them being less interested in Canada Reads? Do you think if they tried to go more in that direction of maybe more popular type of titles? Because I think Meet Me at the Lake was definitely that for sure. Where does that fall in terms of the fan base? Will the fan base be there if it swings one side too far either way, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I don't know. I really hope they maintain the balance that they have going right now. I like that there's a good mix of the literary and the genre titles. I love the inclusion of the romance. Now, for myself, the book did nothing for me, and full disclosure, I started reading it and gave up. It wasn't for me, and typically, romance as a genre is not for me. Although I enjoy a lot of queer romance, but as a genre, it's not for me. But apparently, I am in the minority, because as we learned on the show, which is another amazing thing I learned, is the romance genre is the most highest selling, widely read genre in fiction, and so there's a large audience there, and I hope they can feel welcome and see themselves represented in a national competition. If we're looking for books that are meant to appeal to everybody, or meant to in some way influence everybody, we got to make sure we're looping everybody in. So I think it's a one of the things I've always loved about the show is that it exposed me to things I wouldn't otherwise read. And I think that's a comment that I see every single year, in a bunch of different spaces, is even when folks didn't love all the titles, they were ultimately grateful for the exposure to new things. And in particular, we saw that last year with the graphic novel. There's been so much commentary I saw both online and in my workplace. So I'm a librarian as well as Rebecca, and there's been so many folks come in and wanting to read and then discuss ducks, and would have never picked up a graphic novel, and they're very quick to mention that, to say like, I never thought I'd be reading one of these, or before they read it they would say, oh, I can't believe a comic book is on the show, and then they'd come back with a book and just say, oh my goodness, like I had no idea. And now they're fans, and they're requesting new things and looking for recommendations, and that's always been one of the joys of the show, and one I think the best things about it is the exposure. And I know as super fans, no matter what is on the list, we're going to make an attempt to read it. I never would have read Mexican Gothic last year, because horror was also not something I was interested in, and you know, mushrooms growing inside of a house it wasn't up there either. So, but I loved it. I had so much fun reading that book, and it's only because of the show that I read it. So, and I'm sure there's the fans of the romance and Meet Me at the Lake this year that probably picked up some literary fiction for the first time because of the show. And I hope that's going to be the trend, is just bringing everybody in, and then everybody gets to try something new.
That's one thing I was a little disappointed in. I mean, I was one of them. I read the first chapter of Meet Me at the Lake, and I just thought, "No, I just really I can't read this. It's not my book." But I I know that there was so much criticism from one side, just absolutely saying it didn't belong on the list, it shouldn't be there, they don't wanna see that in the future, and that gave me a little bit of pause because I think I agree with you, I think everything should be game. I think if a defender wants to take it on and put it out there for us to discuss, I think it's a good thing. So I would not want to see it become just a popular title thing because, for example, I was listening to a podcast today that Tara shared with me, and the person, I can't remember the name of the person, but he was saying how publishers, it's becoming more and more difficult for publishers to not just want to go with those kind of popular titles because that's what makes money and that's what they're in the business to do. But I sure as heck hope that they continue to let the reader be challenged in a way as well, and not to just I just think we need a mix of everything and not just lean too far one side or the other based on sales or popularity or TikTok videos that people make. I think it needs to be a good balance for everybody.
Yeah, and I really like how the show's always had a good balance of the within publishing. So they make a point to pull titles that are coming from small indie publishers alongside like the big four. And when else is that going to happen? When are those small titles going to get to, show up alongside, HarperCollins or whatnot? Like, ECW, I think it was ECW who published Denison Avenue. I hope I'm right on that. But there's a perfect example of a book that is now on the bestsellers list because of Canada Reads, and likely would not have been there. Now, not because it didn't deserve it, but just because it's small press. It's it's more of a niche market, I think, with that book, but because of Canada Reads, so many more people are going to get to experience it, and that's just such a gift for everybody.
Absolutely agree since it was my favorite book this year, so I agree with that.
Mine too.
Is there anything else you wanna add about, the competition this year? Anything you wanna suggest for, changes or next year? Anything that to before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I guess I just want to say that, like you said, Denison Avenue was my preferred winner, and I was disappointed when we had to say goodbye to it so quick. I was as shocked as everybody else. But part of me also, alongside that, loved it because it was a juicy twist. And, you know, I got to admit, I loved the discussion at the end between the final two books and all of the commentary that went along with it. So I don't know if we would have gotten to that level of conversation and in-depth analysis of craft and structure and whatnot and theme if it hadn't gone the way it did. And so, ultimately I've got to say it was a really good show, and I'm glad the way it all turned out because I had a really great time. I learned so much, more than we can discuss here in this little bit of time. But I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next with all these great authors.
Yeah, I agree. We had a great season overall, and I feel exactly the way you feel. When it got voted off, I was traumatized, I'm not kidding. It's one of those things I'll never get over, but I agree with you that it does make it if always kind of, quote, "the best book" in our own opinion, made it, then we would lose interest in the show. So if all the time what I pick won, I would be a little bored by it over time. So I agree that even though I was traumatized, I am happy that we had such a great season this year. And so, but I will tell you that next year, I think you're going to need to take like PTO or something, take your time off from work so that you can be with us when we do our YouTube live, because we're going to do that again next year. So we hope that you'll be with us next year for sure.
I will make sure I plan ahead and make that happen because I had a really hard time keeping up this year with everything.
Okay, well, thanks so much, and everybody else, I'm gonna say what Tara always says, which is just keep on reading.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.